Hi, I'm Ruth Molman from the Farmington Hills Historic District Commission, and we will be dealing with some oral history with Bill Burke, who has been a resident of Farmington since 1949, and he is going to talk about his trip to the War Memorial and in Washington, D.C., and some of the things he did from the war into Farmington Township, and how he has contributed to this community from the time he came here.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to have you here with us, and you went down to the War Memorial, and it brought back a lot of memories.
Yes, I did.
Is this the picture of the memorial that you brought us?
Yes. Interesting aspect of it is have the Atlantic and the Pacific memorials. I can't remember which is which, but I think this is the Atlantic. And then within the square towers, they have 4 eagles suspended, metal eagles, under the ceiling, holding a wreath. And if I recall correctly, the wreath on its perimeter lists the primary areas of combat. For example, in the Pacific, Midway Island, the assault on Tarawa Island, where they began to get places to land airplanes, and then Burma, India, China. People forget that those were theaters of the war too, and that's represented here. Then in the Atlantic one, you had three zones in England, or that is in Europe: Central, Southern, and Northern. And you'll often see on a veteran on a parade or something ribbons. Well, there's a ribbon for each of those theaters in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. And those similarly have a wreath and a listing of the primary battle zones. And for example, I had 2 ribbons only because that's where my outfit and I were situated. One in Europe, one in Southern Europe, one in Central Europe.
Now, how did you wind up into the war?
One piece, that's the first thing. I wound up at one piece. And I had gone in, as I recall, at 23 or 24 and came out at 28. While I was in service, I either realized that my affection and desires in my life was to ask my girlfriend and fiance to marry me. I phoned her on the phone, and it was an annoying long-distance hookup, and I couldn't hear her answer. And I said, "Will you talk louder? I can't hear you." And finally it came through that she was saying yes, and she came out to Camp Beale, California. We were married in a very limited service with about 8 people entirely in the church, and honeymooned on 2 two-day passes in the capital of California, Sacramento. And meanwhile, somewhere along the line, we conceived Michael. And about 3 months later, I had to go overseas, and so Rita was left with that whole deal by herself and no support from the likes of her husband. When I got home, Michael was close to 2 years of age.
Oh my, you missed part of the special part of the baby. Yep. Here's a picture at the memorial, and
oh, yeah.
It's your grandson who's going to take pictures of it?
Yeah, grandson Sean is what the entitled videographer, or at least that's what's on his business card. And he worked for NBC as a cameraman for a while, does this in relationship to his father's business, my son Kelly's business, which is videos and programs related to communications of that sort. And he's getting around the world quite a bit, discussing and having a show and an instruction on what's called media relations.
Oh my.
Which is sort of telling executives of companies how to avoid getting trapped by a sharp-minded reporter, for example. And my daughter-in-law, Tricia, actually operates a video camera, but she's not a professional.
So he brought you to the War Memorial, and now you were, what did you do during the war as a soldier?
I took basic training out in California, not knowing what we were going to do, but we were assigned. These were draftees from the states around the Great Lakes, number one. Number two, we were in the medical corps by some twist. We don't know why or anything else, but that's rather than being assigned to artillery or something like that. And later took training as under the name of a general hospital, 78th, and then later was changed to a station hospital, which is a lesser number of beds sized hospital. And eventually, after physical training, obstacle courses, and some use of arms and so forth, we received training at station hospitals, such as Camp White, Oregon, and Camp Beale, California, where we got medical and some of them surgical, some of them X-ray technicians and so on. And eventually the outfit, with a rough count of 500 personnel, that is doctors, nurses, and enlisted men, when all three elements were drawn together in one hospital assignment, operated a hospital with 500 people. And that was a station hospital, technically 300 beds. I don't know how many we actually had, but that's the size the Army designates as a station hospital. A field hospital closer to combat is 75 to 100 beds. Then there is a field station where wounded and sick, but mostly wounded, are moved from one element to a greater technical care, surgical, let's say, maybe no surgery here, but surgery farther down the line. And finally, what they call aid stations, simply a place where you have some medical supplies and it moves with you wherever you go, following combat troops, for example. A medic can be assigned to a platoon or one of many assigned to a company or a regiment. Number one, in the field and in battle, his role is to help the wounded and do it on site, which was simply a form of first aid. For example, if someone were wounded, to simply debride the edge of the wound, for example, so the tissue didn't infect, dump in some sulfa powder. Then there was no penicillin, by the way, until I think it was 1944, if I recall correctly. At any rate, I don't mean to dwell on that long, except the nature of it was not highly skilled surgery, particularly. It was first aid, some of it in a pretty advanced form, and then dump sulfa into a wound to try to avoid infection, bandage it, stop the bleeding, and get them on to the next area of care, which could do a lot more than you could do.
So you were right up there on the front lines then?
Rarely, if ever. I was in the hospital. That's different from an aid station and so on. But we were, a small element of my outfit was sent to southern England, down towards Southampton, where the coastline had some of the cliffs and dunes and hills that would be facing the Americans across the channel, and were trained in assault training and that sort of thing. So climbing the sand dunes and the cliffs and so on. Not to have rifles, but to have musette bags with medical supplies.
Wow.
And we supported the invasion in that sense. We handled the wounded that came from across the channel and got them back to better and further and more detailed treatment and so on. Then eventually I was sent back to my outfit after about 30 to 40 days total in that environment, sort of a fringe of the combat environment, fringe. And then wind up going back to my outfit, which moved all over, following, in a distant sense, the movement of the war. In other words, my whole outfit was shipped across the channel, but not under assault circumstances. Just simply a boat took us over, and we took over some French hospital and moved across Europe, wound up finally in Bremerhaven before the D-Day.
And then you moved to Germany, did you?
I wound up, last move was to Bremerhaven, Germany. And at that point, the war ended. We were waiting in the travel of my outfit included being sent to France to a hospital on what you remember vaguely in history, the name Maginot. I don't know who the Frenchman is it was named after, but
Maginot Line.
You were going to say the Maginot Line. And we were sent to a place that was called the Caserne. I think that means house in French, if I recall, or very generally. has the meaning of that. Like it can be a restaurant, a caserne on the water or something. But at any rate, Caserne Maginot. And we were stationed in this fort, this huge masonry fort, and actually operated a dispensary and some hospital beds there. Some of us, others of us had nothing to do, and you wound up marching and drilling all day to keep you out of trouble, I guess. But then from Maginot, we were sent to be reassigned somewhere to what they call, the guys referred to as a Repel Depot, which meant for reassignment depot. And we were sent there and stayed in tents until they gathered us together as a unit and sent us I can't remember all the moves. Part of our outfit went back to England and went to southern England, Barnstable, England, along the coast, and operated a hospital there. Another part of it went to Prestwick, Scotland, which was an air base, and ferried the wounded home by air. And there's some interesting pictures available here of the ambulance. Well, and at Bremerhaven, Germany, when part of the outfit was sent to Bremerhaven, and then the other part came later and joined us there. There were about 3 different elements. Another one went to a hospital in Bath, England, an English hospital. The wonderful city with the Roman baths in it. And I tried those, by the way. Make your dives very shallow. But the outfit was split up often for periods of time and eventually pulled back together to operate the last of the assignments before I got home. And it was called the Bremerhaven Marine Lazarette, which is the German word for hospital. It was Bremerhaven location. Marine meant Navy, and the Lazarette meant hospital. That was its name as a hospital before we went there and took it over.
I see.
Following that, I had enough, the war ended while we were there, and I had a lot of points because it sounds wrong, but it's quite fair. You had points if you were married. Single, you had lesser number of points. So like, let's say 5 points for being married and 5 points for each child or whatever. It wasn't exactly that, but secondly, if you were overseas 6 months, you got a point. If you're over there 12 months, you had 2 points. If you were in service a year, 2 years, or 3 years, there were points. I had 87 points, among the highest in my outfit, which is not accomplishment, that's time. And got sent home. They sent me as a first sergeant. I was a tech sergeant at the time. And I was given the responsibility of a first sergeant on a truck company, which they were deactivating, a military truck company, and being sent home. And we shipped home to Boston and then to Indiana for discharge, and finally home to my wife at the Pennsylvania station in Detroit, and this 2-year-old kid I'd never seen before.
Wow.
By the way, who didn't care one bit about seeing me either.
Well, we'll take a little break here.
Well, I think so.
Fill you in about what happened when you got back.
That's fine.
Lewis and Clark, great explorers. Hey. Hi, I'm Thomas Jefferson. Would you check out the West for me? Oh, sure. And they take their keelboat up the Missouri. Oh, Buffalo. Then they built Fort Mandan. They're at 1804. Made some friends along the way. I'm Sacagawea. Through the Columbia Gorge. Ah!
There are tons of ways to help with your kids' learning. Find the really good ones on connectforkids.org.
The sweet Pacific Ocean! Yeah!
Oh, you're lucky, young fella. You know, hospitals didn't even use ether for your procedure until about 1846. Yeah, slap on a few live leeches, grab a hacksaw, get to work. Of course, we don't use leeches anymore.
It's fun to know history. Find curious facts from America's past at loc.gov, the Library of Congress website.
And Mr. Burke, Bill, tell us what happened once you came home. You came home to, you said Pennsylvania
let's
Station?
see. I don't think you have reference to this, but we got pregnant very fast. I thought I debated whether I should say that in front of the microphone and camera. Yeah. No, Rita was living with her brother who attended the birth of my son and that kind of thing. And he was very caring and helpful to her. She moved into a flat that he rented on the east side himself, and she moved into the second bedroom there and had little Michael, and for 2 years brought him up without any help from me. And that might be the nicest thing that ever happened to that child. But at any rate, meantime, apartments were terribly difficult to get. Any apartment or a home or anything, especially when you didn't even know if you had a job. And secondly, when I went back to work at Chrysler Corporation, I wasn't too happy with some of the circumstances. Chrysler was fine. It wasn't any. It was an individual thing, and I started job hunting for another job, and I got one working for Blue Cross in downtown Detroit. Well, anyway, once I was employed with a regular income, I could then think about a house. And under the magnificent GI Bill of Rights, and I don't know whether there's anything like that available to the vets of Vietnam. I know there's some advantages and educational ones, but they had, under the GI Bill, you could get a 4% mortgage when there were no 4% mortgages anywhere else. Secondly, it was backed by the government's money, and therefore down payments were virtually nil. And we shopped around, and there were only a couple of developers developing homes under the GI Bill. One of them was Allen Park, one of them was Farmington. And I'm living down within 4 or 5 miles of downtown Detroit on Woodrow Wilson and Seward in an apartment. And then we came out to Farmington, looked at the houses, liked them, and that is in what is now, what we know, you know, as Floral Park, the east end of the city of Farmington. And we got into the house at a very modest price compared to, let me put it this way, it's 1/10 of what it's worth today. And that'll give you an idea about inflation. I became active in the community, going up to City Hall, and I wound up getting appointed to the Planning Commission, and that's been roughly 40 years ago. And we resumed recently, I think. I think I'm still a member. And also I've served on the zoning board. But it's interesting and fascinating in so many ways. And then there's so many other things that are active in, not by any great feelings about I should serve, but things that your life changes. When my sons wanted to play baseball, I got into the Little League. When the number one kid got out of Little League into Babe Ruth baseball, I went into Babe Ruth baseball. When Rita became a den mother in the Cub Scouts, I would wind up driving the car. It looked more like a pickup truck with junk and all the things that go with kids in Cub Scouts, signs and homemade crafts and this stuff. And I wound up chairman of the Cub Scout pack of the Methodist Church in the city of Farmington while attending Our Lady of Sorrows, a Catholic church, Sundays. And I met an awful lot of nice people in that particular Methodist pack too, some of our city fathers' families. And then I was asked by our pastor at Sorrows to form a pack for the kids at Sorrows School, and I wound up a Cub master over there and the chairman of that pack. All I'm getting at is doing these things came just as a matter of being there, and your life takes you in that direction. It isn't because I go around looking for a place to serve.
Now, what did you do? You did certain things for the Floral Park Association.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just was a member. And then we had a real estate man in Farmington. I think his name was Don Dates, D-A-T-E-S, and they had a small office here in Farmington. And he was the president. And then when he was unable to continue it, I became president. And we go before the city hall on matters that were appropriately, should be addressed to them or to the building department or planning commission or something like that. Or go to the builder and get things done. And there were some things that the builder came out and fixed, but usually there'd be one thing which was a gesture at cooperation, and then you never hear from them again, and you wind up following up on them. Well, it was in that activity that got me active with the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board, and since then there's been loads of things that those associations lead to, fundraisers and stuff like that.
You did something else with Floral Park. Did you change its?
Oh, we wanted the advantage of the city's water supply, not in the sense that Farmington Hill, the township, wasn't supplying water, but they were totally reliant on their well or wells, whatever they had, and began to grow pretty rapidly. We felt that we'd be better off if we got hooked up to Farmington and could get their water supply, police protection, and fire department. Now, I'm not saying that, and I definitely want to make it clear, that one was any better than the other at the time, so much as proximity. Mm-hmm. We're right on the city line was Orchard Lake Road. Mm-hmm. So we asked the city to annex us, the city of Farmington, to annex us to the city, which would take us out of the jurisdiction of the township, and we'd be subject to the city authority as different from township, and have a little more developed city services, okay? Mm-hmm. And to make a long story over with, a vote was taken, enough people voted for it, that is city of Farmington as well as township people, enough people out of the two groups voted for it that we wound up annexed to the city. Mm-hmm. And
that's how
the line became roughly the middle of apartment development that's just east of Hawthorne. Half of those apartments, the first ones built on the west side of the property, were in the city. The other half were in Farmington Hills. The developer had to go to two zoning boards or two planning commissions to get approval to finish his apartments and so on. But that's an answer to activities of the Civic Association.
Well, you actually got associated with the city then.
Yeah, and my friendships have grown in the city, and one of the ex-mayors, Bill, asked me to help out once with a fund, I think it was the Heart Fund, as I recall, and I helped co-chair as a fundraiser, and another one would be, that kind of thing keeps coming up, you know. The community center in the township, now Hills, I spent a month or two with their committee circulating to get pledges and donations from businesses to try and keep it going, which at the time we were able to do. It always seems to be on the edge of being able to continue, and I think it's marvelous, and I hope it can.
They're working on it.
Yeah.
They're working on it, and then you, by the time television came along, you did some special things with that too.
Yeah. Yeah, that was public access TV, which is what this is, I'm certain. And I don't remember what got me to go over there for the first time. It's like anything else. You walk in a total stranger to a group. You're ill at ease, uncertain about whether you even should be there, and worried about the impression you make and so on. But as I took the training course. Oh. Mm-hmm. And at the same time as Dave did, as I recall. And that is not necessarily the same class, but roughly the same era. And I think he was a volunteer then, as different from being a paid employee, if I recall correctly. Anyway, we developed the class eventually. Again, I don't know whose idea it was. It wasn't mine. To get the Tri-Option News? Tri-Outlook. Tri-Outlook News, which meant the three communities, triple. And the object then, and it panned out for a little while, was to get a reporter from each of the civic associations and get news which would be a matter of attention and interest for the civic, the portion of the community, the local community, as well as particularly the area served by the civic associations, and that we would be doing news that the Observer, then the Enterprise, would not be doing because it wasn't wide enough interest across their whole circulation area and wind up with that kind of thing. Well, it worked for a little while, but it was tough keeping reporters. We wound up, it seemed to me, and I wound up anchor person along with that lady, and we sometimes worked together, sometimes alternated, giving news of that sort. When it got down to the point where whoever was writing the news for our scripts, we read from scripts, by the way, there was no prompter. Then it was a blessing when we got our first, I don't know whether I'm using the right words, prompter, up on the cameras and could read them and be looking apparently at the camera and talking off the cuff when really you were reading, you know. At any rate, that was quite a development at that point in time. And we wound up with a reasonably good news program, and at the same time, there was no measurement or rating of listeners, and as far as I know, it was successful to whatever extent public access TV was watched. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think you've done an awful lot to enhance the community. Now, I'm curious about one thing. The builder that built your property, did he own the lots and you bought from him, or did you buy the lot and then he built on it?
They were already built on the lot, and the lot came with the house.
The lot came, so he had the lots, which was
Yes.
quite
Yes.
an innovation, because up to that time, you bought the lot and the builder built on it, and this was after World War II. They started to do this.
Exactly. After the war, millions and millions and millions became available through government secured loans, which made money easy to lend by any lender who had the loan secured by Uncle Sam. And so loans were easy to get. Credit, I don't know that it was, you had to have a pretty good credit rating, but after a while that became more difficult because there was a lot of abuse, I'm sure. But when there were 16 million, 15 million people in uniform when the war ended.
And they came home.
And quite a few of those came home and bought homes. And that, to me, is an indication of the success of that home lending program. However, it created problems in its own way.
But that's how you to the community and helped to build it up and make it what it is today.
Oh, and my wife, by the way, was Cub Scouting and became chair lady of a women's organization at church. One of the things I think you'll find fascinating, there's I think it's auto repair shop. It's either Cadillac or LaSalle Auto Repair on Orchard Lake Road between 12 and 13 on the west side, and it has a cupola on top, glassed in, and a door. That is where my wife worked as an air raid spotter.
During the war.
Yeah, because although the war was over, as we knew it, the Cold War was still there. And I went up there once and they had a drawing silhouettes of the airplanes, what shape they had, so you could pick one out and look down and see if that was flight so-and-so, scheduled, okay. If it wasn't, you called, I think, the FAA. Yeah, what was the name of the airport? Do you remember?
Chrisport, yes.
That's right. That's right. Wasn't that mostly what Kendallwood is now?
That's right. You built it on the old
Kendallwood 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, the building is still there, the original hangar.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's car repair as well as painting and such.
Special car, and then they have little shops in where the hangars were.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, and I wound up getting a picture taken up there once for some purpose, I don't know what.
We never had airplanes come, but
Nope.
There's a whole other story of the Japanese let out some little lantern type things.
I love the idea of my wife serving up there, and then she would come home with the stories. She and other ladies, one of them was a wife of a Farmington councilman, Jim Kavanaugh's wife, Betty Kavanaugh, worked with her as a teammate and so on. And they were very serious about this, and they took it seriously.
Well, we were lucky. Nobody ever came over.
As far as I know, we weren't bombed.
No. Well, thank you so much for coming and filling us in on these wonderful things that went on and giving us a little background of our community and how it developed here.
Probably more than you needed.
Oh, no, people are very interested in this, and I
good.
thank you for coming.